Welcome to the What If It's Not Depression Vodcast. I'm your host, Dr. Achina Stein. Today, I am interviewing Margie Bissinger. She is a physical therapist, integrative health coach, and happiness trainer. And Margie has had over 25 years of experience helping people with osteoporosis, osteopenia to improve their bone health through an integrative approach. Margie is the author of Osteoporosis and Exercise Guide. She oversees all of the osteoporosis initiatives in the state of New Jersey as a physical therapy representative to the New Jersey Interagency Council on Osteoporosis. She teaches an online 6-week program, Happy Bones, Happy Life, to give people the tools to naturally achieve optimal bone health. She's the host of the Happy Bones, Happy Life podcast and the Natural Approaches to Osteoporosis and Bone Health Summit. She's been featured in the New York Times, Menopause Management, OB-GYN News, and contributed to numerous health and fitness books. If you like this episode, please click the like button and subscribe to my channel. Welcome, Margie. Thank you for coming.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's great. I am so excited to connect the dots for people about osteoporosis and happiness and how all of that connects to depression. And so, but I'd love for you to start with how you even got into all of this. Tell us your story. What inspired you?
Well, it all started years ago when I moved to New Jersey. So I'm a physical therapist. My background is in orthopedic physical therapy, working with people with neck problems, back problems. So I'm working in New Jersey, and I was approached by a group of doctors who worked with osteoporosis patients. And they asked me if I would see their patients, to help with exercise. So I said yes. And this is really early on. This is before Fosamax. This is way early on with osteoporosis and medications. And it was so sad because people well-meaning, but basically they would go to their doctors and they would say, you have to exercise, but they didn't have guidance and they didn't know where to go. So they would go to, and this is even before the internet really was big on that. They'd go to magazines, or they would go, they would look all over, and oftentimes they would do exercises that actually increase their risk of fractures. And I realized something's wrong here. The message needs to get out. So I became very active in speaking and working. Then I joined the Interagency Council on Osteoporosis with the state of New Jersey and just worked with that, as well as the National Osteoporosis Foundation as a physical therapist, really trying to help get the message out. So that's how I got into that. And then fast forward, my middle son got type 1 diabetes when he was in college. And I saw how food was really changed his life and really helped to manage. And I said, you know what, I have to learn because I know that piece is missing. So then I went back to school, studied nutrition, became a health coach, added that piece to the puzzle, which is huge. And then lastly, I've been teaching happiness to my patients for over 35 years and have seen the power with chronic pain and how when people learn these happiness habits. So that's always been a part of what I do. I just got more training in that, really how to teach happiness and integrate it. So that's sort of in a nutshell how I added all those things and got so involved with osteoporosis. And the good thing is there's so much that can be done. I think that's the exciting news, that it's not as though, oh my gosh, when people hear they have osteoporosis, it conjures up the worst images of their life is over and they're not going to be able to be active anymore or enjoy grandchildren. And that's just not true.
Right. Oh, I'm so glad that you said that. It's really important to emphasize that there's so many things that people can do for themselves and not be sort of held hostage, so to speak, with just taking medications. There's actually things that they can do. But let's start from the beginning. I would love for you to explain, because I think many people don't really understand the difference between osteoporosis and osteopenia. Can you describe what the difference is between those two words that have to do with bone health?
Absolutely. Basically, just the word in general, osteoporosis, means means porous bones. And so what happens is there's really two things. It's bone density and bone quality that are important. However, when they look at it to get that definition, all they look at is the DEXA, the bone density test. And they measure your T-score, which is standard deviations away from like a 30-year-old. And so if it's 0 to -1, that's normal. Anything -1 to -2.5 is considered osteopenia. So it's sort of considered the precursor to osteoporosis, versus -2.5 and lower. If you've lost, if you have more standard deviations than -2.5, that's considered osteoporosis. So it's purely based on your bone density test. And it does miss, there's a lot missed in that, because that's only measuring the quantity of bone. It's not measuring the bone quality. And so I think that's a big problem, because two people with the same bone density can be completely different in their bone quality. So there are,
so if you can talk more about what do you mean by bone quality? Can you give examples of?
Sure. So bone quality means there's a matrix. There's, in terms of the hardness, maybe like a piece of chalk, where a piece of chalk could be really hard, but it will fracture easy. Whereas a stronger bone it's surrounded by this matrix, this collagen matrix, and that can be flexible. So it's sort of, I'm trying to think of a good way. It's something as though even if it loses some of its strength, it has flexibility, and that's due to the collagen, which is important for protein. It's important vitamin C, all makes up that collagen matrix. So it's a matter of being flexible versus just something that could be strong, but it could fracture, if that makes sense.
Right. It's almost like glass and plexiglass, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, that would be an example in the outer world,
Right.
So collagen is a really important aspect of improving a person's health, is improving production of collagen, which requires eating certain kinds of food to supply that to your body. Many people think that, and I hope doctors have been educated about these. It's amazing how many doctors still just recommend calcium carbonate. And, the studies have shown that calcium carbonate is not necessarily a good thing to take on a daily basis unless it's in combination with other things, like other minerals like magnesium and zinc and collagen, right? And vitamin D. And so there's a whole spectrum of nutrients that should go along with the calcium carbonate.
That's such a good point. 2 points I just want to talk about. I wanted to mention there is something, though, called the trabecular bone scoring that you can ask, and that measures bone quality. So I think it's not something typically prescribed because it's not covered with the basic DEXA test, but it gives you a whole nother measurement in terms of really assessing bone quality plus bone strength. And it's just something, it's software that they add on. So it's just something for people to know that you can. And there are places that have that. So it's just something to be aware of. But you said something so important. Oh my gosh.
Right.
Because that's what I see. A lot of times, not meaning any harm, but the doctor will tell people, make sure to get your calcium and make sure you get your vitamin D.
Right.
And the problem is exactly what you said. So people are even getting some in their diet, and then they're taking more calcium. So what I see typically is people taking too much calcium, but they're not taking the critical nutrients like the magnesium, the vitamin K2, and all the other things that you need. Just like you said, it's not just calcium. And I think that's a real problem because they're taking, even a supplement of 1,000, and they're already getting a lot in their diet. So I see people overtaking calcium, not getting enough of the other nutrients.
Right. And the calcium is lining, what they're finding is that the calcium is lining the inside of your arteries and not the bone. So there's a process that the body has in order to integrate that calcium into the bone. And that's why you need all these other minerals, particularly vitamin D and magnesium. There's a whole list of other things too, which we won't get into, but I think it's important for people to know that. Now, I just want to get back to the trabecular bone score. Who would you ask to do that? And would that be with the DEXA scan?
Yes. It's just software. So it would be the place that you go to. Now, the interesting thing is, because of the way DEXA is, and people don't realize that, people think it's the holy grail, and it is one of the tests we have that's important. However, people, it doesn't correlate with that, if your score is this, that all those people fracture. It really depends on so many different things. But basically, if you go to a different place, then your values are going to be inaccurate. So sometimes you have to weigh, is it better to go to the same place so I can see how I've changed? Or do I go to another place that has the TBS or trabecular bone scoring? But I think it's a wonderful addition. So if you have that option, and you just have to find out who has that. And unfortunately, it's not everywhere. I don't know why, because it gives such great information.
Yeah, you would think that would be just part of getting a DEXA scan automatically. You know, if there's such value in the quality, and there's such a significant difference from one person's DEXA score and another person's DEXA score in terms of quality, yeah, I would absolutely want to have that information. Yeah.
I think it's not covered by a lot of insurance, and I don't think it's that expensive. I don't know the actual going rate, but that may be one of the reasons, or some facilities just don't want to put the money in to have it, but there are places that have it. So it's not as though you can't get it.
Wonderful. Wonderful. That's a great tip to add. I've actually never heard of that. So it's news to me as well. So let's jump into the role of exercise. So tell me, what are some specific exercises that we can do to strengthen our bones?
And this is so important because a lot of people just think, oh, I can do whatever, or I can just walk. And yes. And I just want to say two things. No matter what you do, any exercise is good. Any exercise is good. I will tell people the precautions when it comes to osteoporosis. But a lot of people think, or the doctor, I'm just going to walk. And so they go on, 10-mile hikes a day. And yes, that's good, but that's not exactly what they found in the research increases bone density. What they found is very specific. It's resistance training and high impact. And so the highest gains, there's one study recently called the Lifmore, and they took people who had osteoporosis and they really put them through pretty intense program. It's not like just lifting 2 pounds. And what they found significant increases in bone density. The issue is it was supervised. And so most important thing is that you do something safely. And so what I recommend to everybody, if you have the opportunity, the absolutely best thing to do is see a physical therapist who specializes in this or who's had experience with osteoporosis. And they will really look at you, and they can customize your own program. That's the absolutely best situation, because oftentimes people might be tight, or maybe they have a problem with their hip, and it's never, ever one size fits all. It's never, ever, oh, do this exercise or do this, and you're all set. There's basic categories. So strength training is really important. And the areas that are most prone to fractures are the spine, the hips, and the wrist. So you want to make sure that in your program, you're getting all of those areas that have the trabecular bone, those 3 areas, because those are the most prone to fractures. And what I see typically is, people will do a lot of arms and they'll do some legs, but they don't do a lot of back strengthening, where things working on your back muscles and back strength. So I think that's really important. But then high impact. So weight bearing, yes, is good. And again, that depends on your bone density. If you have really weak bones, you're not going to start doing heavy duty jumping and things. You have to really be careful. But for people who can tolerate, or people wanting to prevent osteoporosis, doing anything with impact, even going on your toes. I love this exercise. Like you go up on your toes and you go down gently on your heels, not too hard. It's really. So if you go like twice, you go like up, and I call it pump, pump, and you go. And I have people put a hand on the back of their neck and their back, because this way they're supporting their curves, because it's also critical. It's critical that you exercise in good posture. So the types of exercises are weight bearing, but the higher impact does have more effect on bone density. But again, you have to weigh that with where you're at and making sure you're safe. And then the resistance training, they really found the resistance training, even twice a week, is really effective. But things like squats, things like lunges, all of that, where you're using your body weight, if done safely, are all really great for the bones as well.
Right. So for people who don't know what resistance training is, and the word high impact kind of might sound a little dangerous, like what, if I have osteoporosis, why would I want to do high impact? Can you just describe what you mean?
Yeah. So resistance is just like if you contract, let's say the arm, you're contracting against any type of resistance. So it could be a weight. And what happens is, so let's say we have a weight in our hand and we're contracting the muscle. That's saying to this muscle, hey, more bone is needed here. It gives an impetus. It's like stimulus for more bone to be produced because of the force, because bone responds to the forces placed upon it. There's this Wolf's law, and that's what happens. So when we're contracting and it's tugging on that bone, it's saying, hey, the muscle's tugging, we need more bone. So it could be free weights, it could be resistance bands, it could be the exercise machines at a health club, it could even be your body weight, sometimes when you're doing the lunges or you're doing things like that. So that's resistance training. The other thing, and the thing is this, with resistance training, though, it's not the repetitions. A lot of people think, oh, I'll do 50 repetitions. That's not what they found. They found it's the load. And so ideally around 8 to 10 repetitions. That study did, I don't want to confuse people. It was called 85% of one repetition maximum. But basically it's doing around 10 reps. By 10, you're tired and it's somewhat hard. That was what worked, but people have to work up to this. I certainly don't, you don't never want to overdo it. That's why I think it's so great if you can work with someone who knows what they're doing for the guidance so that you are doing things safely. But, and it's usually covered by, this is usually covered by insurance, at least, a few sessions just to make sure. But anyway, in terms of, that's the resistance. And then the weight bearing is anything where the weight of the body is you're working against gravity. So that is walking, dancing, anything. The higher impact would be, when there's a little more force, but again, you have to be careful. So anything with the weight bearing is still very good. And you're still getting forces on your bones. And when they've shown the opposite, we live in such a sedentary society right now. It's so sad. And they did a study with people on bed rest because they had issues with their back. And they found they almost lost 1% of their bone per week on bed rest. So if you don't use it, you lose it. And so, but regardless of what people can do, people listening saying, oh, I can't lift weights or I can't do that. The other thing that everybody can do, though, everybody can improve their balance and reduce their risk of falling. And that, you can do balance exercises every single day. Even I love Tai Chi, standing on one foot, if you can do that, practicing or shifting weight. There's so many great things that you can do that can make such a difference as you get older. And just people forget about that. And then all of a sudden they're older and their balance isn't good and they fall. So that's so important because typically the biggest problem is fractured. And so if you can reduce falls, that's amazing.
Absolutely. So, and then the high impact, what is the high impact?
Well, high impact, again, that's, that would be doing type things like jumping, doing things where you're getting more force. In this study, they had people like lift up on a bar and go down a little bit. So they're getting, but again, I totally do not recommend to do any of this unless you're supervised, the higher impact. Again, people, running's a higher impact. So for some people, that's fine. Again, it does vary. And that's why it is nice to work with someone, but that's what they've shown. But that's what they've shown, when people ask, people think, oh, I'm doing the 2 pounds, I'm increasing bone density. Each person's different. So if you haven't done anything, that might be enough stimulus, but it won't sustain itself. So it just, that's why what can be a stimulus for one person isn't a stimulus for another.
Yeah. So I'm curious. I'm curious about the exercises to strengthen the back. Would something like doing a plank or a plank be a back exercise? What other exercise would you recommend to strengthen?
So anything, working the back muscles. So anything, where you're working backwards, if you're using weights, working anything backwards, if you're in prone, lifting one arm, lifting a leg, you can even add weights to that. Also, if you're in prone, lifting up. So sometimes I'll have people over something and then they lift up or on the ball. So they're doing back extension. And should we get into something interesting about what's contraindicated? What's dangerous? Can we? We want to get? Well, we can wait for that. But okay.
So I definitely want you. I would love for you to talk about what are some of the exercises that people should avoid.
But the reason I'm putting this up is there was a study done many years ago at the Mayo Clinic, and they looked at people doing flexion, which is forward bending, rounding out. versus extension, which is backward bending. And they wanted to see, it wasn't the greatest study, but it was good because they got great information, but it wasn't like a huge double-blind study, but it was a study. And they just wanted to see what people doing different exercises, their risk of fractures over a 1 to 6 year period of time with people who had osteoporosis. So the group that only did extension, those are the things I'm talking about, going back, or lying on your stomach, like those, going back. And there's a lot of like Pilates things also, that's really great with extension, lifting one arm, one leg, all of those things, just working, or even stabilizing the core and bringing a leg back. You're going to get some trunk, musculature as well.
Right.
But anyway, so they found extension. Those people there were 66 people, 659 actually postmenopausal women in the study, but they had a 16% fracture rate. People only doing backward. The group only doing forward bending. So that would be touching your toes, doing sit-ups, rounding. They had an 89% fracture rate.
Oh my gosh. That is a huge difference. Huge difference.
Huge. The combination had 53%, and then no exercising had 67%. But the reason that is because people don't realize where they get fractures. And the fractures occur in the front of the vertebrae, the front of the spine. It's not in the back. Like if you touch your back, you feel those bones. It's not there. It's more forward. So when you round, you're actually compressing that area. And so that's where the fractures occur. You get compression fractures, or instead of being nice square shaped, the vertebral bodies become wedge shaped. So when you're in that position, you're putting a lot more force on already weakened structure. So it makes sense. And that's the biggest thing. So extension is great. Not only does it help, first of all, who doesn't want to strengthen their back? You'll feel much better. And it's going to help your posture. But it also, so anything where you're going backwards, anything with the weights, with the pulleys, anything, that's all amazing. That's what people have to be aware of. They have to be aware of, you do not want rounding or forward bending. Mm-hmm. And that also goes how you're sitting. A lot of people just sit like that.
Absolutely. I talk about posture all of the time with my patients. Yeah, it's really important for you to sit up straight and your back up against the chair. And you might even need to support your lower back in some instances. So, feeling checking out different chairs and feeling into how you sit appropriately. And what happens is a lot of people are in front of their computer is that they pull their head forward to look at the screen. And what I say is to actually sit up straight and have the keyboard where your lap is, as opposed to up here, and to pull the screen closer to you so you're able to see it, as opposed to craning your neck forward. It's amazing how much people have upper back pain and neck and shoulder pain because of the way they sit. So
I couldn't agree more. That's something I've been teaching posture for 35 years, actually. And what goes with what you do is that they've actually found that in an expanded posture, you feel so good that it actually increases your happiness and your mood. So posture is really related as well to well-being and feeling better. So it's such a win-win, and it's, and you also injure yourself. I mean, people really injure themselves by sitting, by thinking, that slumped posture is even if people do that, your shoulder motion, if you're in a slump position, you try to lift your shoulder. It's an impingement position. Right. So there's just so many negative things. But anyway, so the forward bending, and then people always ask, well, wait, yoga, Pilates, how can I do any of that if I can't do those postures? The good news is you can. You just do what's called a neutral posture, and you just avoid rounding. And as a matter of fact, I could, there are handouts actually that the National Osteoporosis Foundation, Sherry Betts, created, like fabulous handouts on what's safe, what isn't in terms of, yoga and Pilates positions.
Oh, that's great. What was her name?
Her name is Sherry Betts. She's one of the speakers on the Natural Approaches to Osteoporosis and Bone Health Summit.
Cool.
Yeah. So she actually goes through, what's safe, what isn't, but I can also give you the references for those so people can have access.
That's great. Yeah. So you mentioned earlier, we're going to change gears a little bit. And you mentioned earlier about diet, and how you learned so much about how having a healthy diet can help our bones. Can you talk about that?
Yes, I think the problem is a lot of people are deficient in the micronutrients.
Mm-hmm.
And so your bones need those building blocks. They don't just stay strong on their own. So if you don't have the magnesium, and also the K2, which helps take the calcium and put it into your bones,
Right.
that then it's just not going to get there, number one. But if you don't have those building blocks, the bones need all of that. It's sort of like an orchestra. They need all those wonderful nutrients and protein. A lot of people don't realize, people think, oh, I can't have too much protein, but they've been doing studies that you absolutely need enough. And that as we get older, some people really aren't getting enough. You need the protein, you need the vitamin C, you need just all the things. And things like sugar and processed foods, things like sugar reduce the absorption of the calcium and the magnesium. So all that junk food really does play havoc on your bones and makes such a big difference. So it just contributes so much to healthy bone. And that matrix that we talked about, the quality of the bone is going to be dependent on what you're feeding your body.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you mentioned, so we talked about vitamin D, vitamin K2, and it's usually D3 as opposed to D2. D3, K2, magnesium, calcium, and what other nutrients are necessary?
Well, there's boron, there's zinc. What I have people do, if they can, is really get a micronutrient test. I have found, because what happens with osteoporosis, unlike other things, is that you may not have symptoms. That's the thing. It's not that it hurts. All of a sudden you feel fine. And then, you get a bone density test and you're in your 50s and you find out you have osteoporosis. It shows. And the strange thing is that if you don't have risk factors, the recommendation is not till you're 65, which I totally don't agree with, because there's so much you can do in these, it's just good to have a baseline and to know what's going on. Right. But regardless of that,
to prevent all of that. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and most people are, in my experience, most people are very deficient in vitamin D3 and magnesium. And so, so people are eating foods that are high in calcium because they want to prevent osteoporosis, but they're extremely deficient, lab low or insufficient of magnesium and vitamin D3. Just to point out those two, and who knows, you're right. There's other nutrients that are really important as well, but they aren't necessarily commonly ordered, especially by a conventional doctor. So D tends to be ordered, but not often enough. And sometimes the lab level, the serum vitamin D level is considered normal, but it's low normal. And so some people would say, oh, my doctor said my vitamin D was normal. But if you actually look at the number, it might be 20. When really vitamin D for optimal health, it really should be above 60 to 80, and as far as I'm concerned, especially for the brain too.
It's so interesting because, different groups, and there's not a right answer. I can't ever tell people this is exactly, but you're right. Most doctors, when people have osteoporosis, do order the vitamin D level, which is the one thing they do, which is good, because people really, you don't know. And that's the beauty, that you really can see what are you getting, what are you absorbing, and with everything you're doing. But you're right. Sometimes it will be very low and they're like, oh, my doctor said this is fine, So I think
best to get numbers, actual numbers.
What I find, though, when people do but what I was saying was that, so the people, a lot of times, they don't want to go on medication. And so we really need to dig, just like you dig to find the root cause of depression or what's going on. The same thing with the bones. We have to figure it out. And so because they don't maybe have symptoms, you're not going to know early on. So that's why it's nice to do the test, because some people do have symptoms And some people have eczema, or they'll have other symptoms, brain
Right.
fog, or they'll have, a lot of GI issues, tremendous amount of, we can go there in a minute,
Right.
of,
Yeah.
of GI symptoms. But if you don't, that's why it's nice to get the micronutrient test. And then I've seen that people have, all sorts of things. CoQ10 is low, or it's just very interesting. But you're right, magnesium is often very low. D can be low. So yeah, it's very helpful to sort of see what is missing, because you want to do everything you possibly can. And so it's
Right.
nice sometimes to, not to guess, to be able to, test and not guess and figure out what might be lacking.
Absolutely. So I screen people for specific nutrients, because if they're low across the board, then generally you're probably insufficient in the others as well. And, many times it's related to having poor digestion or insufficient digestion of the foods due to a variety of factors. So sometimes people aren't able to absorb the nutrients, even if they're putting it in their diet, and eating the proper foods, but they're not necessarily assimilating those foods. So do you notice a role of digestion in bone health?
Oh, it's so big. Just exactly what you said, that people are eating a healthy diet, but they have issues. And so, I mean, even people who just like are rushing in their life, and they're just shoving their food in, and the body thinks it's under stress and it shuts down digestion. So even as simple for that to people, I always have people take some deep breaths before they eat and just get themselves nice and calm, because certainly something I didn't do when I was really busy in physical therapy. You had a little time for lunch in between patients. So I would just shove in the food as fast as physically possible, but that's not good. You're not going to absorb. But there's a huge relationship between, if people who have digestive issues and they're not digesting their food and they're not absorbing the nutrients, and osteoporosis, as well as people who have, and they've proven that, but people who have celiac disease, or even gluten, any type of gluten sensitivity, there's going to be a reduction in bone density. And so you must deal with this. To just mask it and not deal with these root causes, you're really missing the boat. And it's so interesting with the gluten. I've seen so many people, and they just decided to go gluten-free. They didn't even, some people were tested, some weren't, but a year later they had their bone density done, and their bone density improved, as well as their arthritis. They got rid of their arthritis, so but that's a big factor. And I know celiac, everybody appreciates celiac now. Right. And really, most people say that anyone with osteoporosis should get tested for gluten, because it's such an issue, and you really aren't going to absorb your nutrients, and it's, or it's going to cause inflammation, and any type of inflammatory condition also can affect your bones. So you can have
celiac disease, but you could also have non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So it could be either or. And I think it's interesting to hear that you could actually see a difference on the DEXA scan even in a year. That's something I did not know. That's great news.
I mean, that's just my experience. They haven't really done studies. They've done studies with celiac disease. And bone density. But you're right, celiac disease is a very small percentage of the population. So that's not the majority of people. The majority of people are, non-celiac gluten sensitivity, or, have other issues with gluten. So, and unfortunately, most people don't test for that, or most people don't even really acknowledge, it's not, I had my husband, who's a physician, really would have died if we didn't figure out the gluten, because it can be that inflammatory. And so it's something that I know that it's something you deal with, and it's something that, I make a big deal with bone health, that you must get tested, because
absolutely,
because it is a root cause, and something else you don't want to miss.
It's absolutely a major root cause for brain health. It's really, really important to be gluten and dairy free for a period of time as part of a program, while you're addressing these other root causes. And then maybe down the line, you could probably try to reintroduce gluten. But everybody is affected by gluten, especially if you have leaky gut or a dysbiosis. It's just fuel to the fire. So in the same way that pouring oil, into a fire, on the stove, oil by itself is not an issue. But if you were to combine certain factors all at once, it can really explode. And so gluten is one of those kinds of things that it may not necessarily be a problem if by itself, but if you have other factors involved, like stress or poor digestion or a gut dysbiosis, or chronic bacterial infections or other types of infections going on, that combination is not a good combination. So sometimes you have to remove the gluten until you can figure out whether gluten is part of that combination or if it's actually a huge issue just by itself. So,
you said one other thing, the dysbiosis, the research has shown now that dysbiosis also affects bone health, just like, I think just like you've discovered in your work with depression and everything that you do, the bones aren't in isolation either. So all these factors also affect their bones. And the other thing that people don't even talk about is stomach acid. And low stomach acid. And they found that, proton pump inhibitors and all these medications that reduce stomach acid are increased risk of osteoporosis. But a lot of people do have reduced stomach acid, and they found that there is a correlation. There's Dr. Wright, who actually measured stomach acid. And he found that in his population of osteoporosis, I think it was 90% of the people had reduced stomach acid. So it's something very important.
Absolutely. And as we get older, we have a reduction in production of pancreatic enzymes as well. So that just decreases with age. So it really is much more important as we get older to strengthen those emotional triggers of releasing acid. So the deep breathing and connecting to your food, smelling your food, chewing your food, taking the time to release those acids, because you can easily do that. I'm sure everybody has experience looking at a magazine and saying, oh, that looks really good. And you start salivating. So it's, you could actually, consciously trigger those juices to flow. And if you're salivating, then the likelihood of you increasing stomach acid and pancreatic enzymes are more likely to happen. And as you said, sitting before your meal and, doing some deep breathing, it's really important to connect to your food and develop those habits of eating on a regular basis at regular times. So your body knows when you're it's establishing those rhythms, and it'll release those enzymes and acid when you're actually having the meal, which is why sometimes people get hungry, right, at certain times of the day. It's because your body's already prepping and preparing itself to receive food, right? So hunger is an important trigger for releasing those enzymes and having those meals to digest it most efficiently. So, we talked about a lot of things, and I would love to, again, let's connect the dots even deeper. Let's talk about the relationship between osteoporosis, you mentioned stress before, and happiness. How are they all connected?
It's so interesting because with stress, as you know better than anybody, with increased stress, we have increased cortisol. And cortisol, they've done studies and showing that what happens with cortisol actually reduces the activity of the bone building cells, the osteoblasts. So, and there's research that has shown that there's a correlation between increased stress and reduced bone density, which makes sense. Right. And so stress is, and they've even shown there's another study done on social stress, and that people had reduced bone density. And so it can, it really affects our bones. And so often people come to see me and they're like, okay, tell me exactly what exercises I should do and what I should eat. But they don't realize that the stress itself is such a big factor. Right. And they absolutely need to reduce the cortisol, and they need to, because it's, it's the stress hormone, and it's just like they've shown on your own corticosteroids, it's your own, they found that there's a relationship between, different steroids and osteoporosis, you're producing your own with the cortisol. So
Right.
so that's huge. So stress reduction, and I work with people all the time. I mean, it's just such a key component to this. The
Right.
second thing is happiness. So there's actually a study done that was the Finnish study, and they showed that there's a correlation between life satisfaction and bone density. And it makes sense because you're happier, you're going to do all the great habits to keep your bones nice and strong. You're going to eat well, you're going to exercise. But on the other hand, when you're, but just by being happier, also it increases your bone density. So it's just such a win-win. And, as I mentioned, I've been teaching happiness to my patients, really seeing miracles. It's just, it sort of caught me off guard when I first started. I had gone through not a great situation, and patients were saying, "Oh, Margie, you're so happy." Now I had chronic pain patients at the time. And I'm thinking, like if they only knew what I just went through, maybe they wouldn't say that. But then it hit me. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, you know what? I sort of am happy, and happiness is an inside job, not based on your external circumstances.
Right. Yes. I love the way that you said that it's an inside job. Yeah. Yeah. So, I'm glad that you mentioned, throughout this whole episode, the different types of medications that can cause or contribute to osteoporosis. We talked about steroids, we talked about proton pump inhibitors, and for the audience, people who don't know what proton pump inhibitors are, it's medications like omeprazole and I'm trying to think
the purple pill, the little
purple pill, right?
yeah,
to reduce acid. It's important for people to know that those types of medications should not be taken long term because it can contribute to osteoporosis. And so many people don't really know that, and they're not informed of that. So it should really be used at no more than 6 weeks, this class of medications, the PPIs. And when you're on a PPI, you're better off trying to figure out why you're having these issues, and to attempt to come off of them by getting to the root cause. There's very few conditions that require long-term use of PPIs. And those conditions would be something like Zollinger-Ellison syndrome, and I'm blanking on the other. There's two conditions that require long-term use. And it's basically because your acid production is switched on and permanently on, that can cause serious damage at high levels of acid production. So, so I wanted to ask you if there are other classes of medications that might be contributing to osteoporosis as in terms of side effects.
Well, people, if sometimes the thyroid medication, if they're taking too much, like hyperthyroidism, that can affect
Right.
it.
Absolutely.
Any type of steroids are really big, and the SSRIs, the the antidepressants. That's interesting. And typically that's rarely ever told to patients, that when you go on an antidepressant, and the studies have shown that it actually reduces bone density and increases fracture risk. So, but that's not talked about. It's just not talked about. People don't realize that this is a side effect. And so, for those people who have to be on them, and I think we talked about this before, the different types, but the one type that hasn't been shown is the tricyclic antidepressants.
Right.
But
Which
the
are
other
an older class. It's an older class of medications like amitriptyline and nortriptyline, disipramine. But the SSRIs are the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors like sertraline and escitalopram, fluvoxamine, fluoxetine, right?
Yeah, and even the SNRIs, right?
Right, like venlafaxine, and I'm trying to think of the trade names because I
always forget
the generic name. So venlafaxine and what is the other one? I always have the trade names in my head as opposed to duloxetine. That's it, duloxetine and venlafaxine are the top two. So you said that there were some studies that show that it could cause or contribute to osteoporosis. were there any studies that showed how long it would take? How many years of being on SSRIs
That's a good
resulted in
question.
that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd have to look into it more in detail. There's a great article by John Neustadt who
Hmm.
did a whole paper on different medications that affect bone health.
Hmm.
Yeah, I have to look back at the articles. I just know that that's one of the side effects, and I don't. That's a good point. How long? I mean, I guess the point is if people are on it for long, and obviously sometimes people do have to be on medication,
Right.
then you have to do that's even makes it more important to counteract that, to make sure you're eating amazing, to make sure you're doing all these great exercises, to really make sure you're taking care of your bones, regardless if you have, I mean, this is the thing at all ages. It's not just when you find out you have osteoporosis. At
Right.
all ages, people need to take care of their bones. Even
Absolutely.
children, the pediatrician should be telling them, because what you do when you're younger, it's sort of like a bank. Women at the age of 18 and men at the age up to 20, 80 to 90% of your bone, your peak bone, you develop then. So and so many kids are eating terribly and not exercising. So it's so important really throughout life to be doing the nutrition, the exercise, the stress reduction, the happiness also, to just, help your bones as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I'm really excited for you because you're going to be having a summit coming up, the Natural Approaches to Osteoporosis and Bone Health Summit. That's long overdue. I think it's so important that people learn about everything they need to know about osteoporosis. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I'm so excited because I just want to get this information out to everybody, because what I've seen, again, as I said, it's been 25 years I've been working with people, and when people put all the pieces together, not only do their bones get better, they decrease their risk of fractures, but also everything gets better as well. So on the summit, I have fabulous physical therapists. Because I'm in the profession, I really could have the people that teach the physical therapists. So I have Sherry Betts, who I mentioned earlier, Sarah Meeks, like these amazing physical therapists and people who've done the research. And the best part is they actually show the exercises. So they actually demonstrate the exercises. And so that's one piece of it, as well as, I have balance exercises by Joan Pagano. So great different types of exercises as well. So that's big into exercise on the summit. Then working with functional medicine doctors similar to yourself who have actually worked with osteoporosis. They see tremendous amount of people, what's worked. And so they share, what the integrative approach. Then I have people on, scientists. We talk about glyphosate and different areas, blood sugar, just all sorts of things, as well as different stress reduction and someone on happiness. So there's just a whole plethora of really things people can do. And I really wanted people, and I have people, even energy healing. I have Deborah Wayne, who's a person who does this high-speed healing. I have her do a session with people. So I wanted to really give people tools. So there's lots of tools. And even just by signing up, you get a book that I wrote on exercise, just a very beginner book, but it gets people started, as well as we talked about the posture. So there was another program I did. It's like a 1-day mini course, and not 1 day, it's a 1 page, but I include 7 posture exercises, like really showing you what you can do, how to sit, how to stand. So that's all just by signing up, you'll get that. By signing up, actually, you get John Neustadt's talk as well with the medication. So yeah, so there's a lot. So anyway, there's lots of resources, and I just wanted to get as much information because it's not out there. Just like what you do, you're one of the few people, this isn't out there. And so it's just not easily accessible. So I just wanted to get all these experts coming together to really provide
Awesome. So I'm curious that, just in case someone watches this episode a year from now, would this summit be available for people to buy if they wanted to in the future? Is it going to be evergreen?
Yeah, well, this is what I heard. So I just recently found this out because the company I'm doing it with, company Health Means, who does a lot of summits, and this is a new procedure. So I'm pretty sure now they said that this is going to be available, which I'm so excited because typically it's a period of time, and then but I'm pretty sure that it's going to be. I mean, that's what I recently heard, that they've just changed the policy and it will be available down the road as well. So. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. So again, it's natural approaches to osteoporosis and bone health summit. And, as you hopefully put together and connected the dots, that everything that you can do for your bones, you can do for your brain. And if you're interested in doing a deep dive in depression and the root causes of depression as a focus, you can join me on my boot camp, and I'm enrolling on a regular basis. And it's a 12-week online group program to find and address all of the root causes of depression. So, Margie, thank you so much. I will include your links and my links in the show notes, so that if people are interested in doing either or of these programs that to, really get a good handle on their health and get ahead and prevent future issues, then they'll be able to find us.
Oh, fabulous. Well, thank you so much. And I love all the work that you're doing. It's so, so important, because that's one of the big root causes I see, is that people don't deal with their depression. So, or whatever is causing it.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes it's confused with depression. It's actually something else. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, Margie, thank you so much for your time. I'm sure everyone will receive this episode with all of this great information, and hopefully they will join you at your summit.
Oh, I hope so. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.